Now I must tell you of a strange coincidence. The very year that Nell Holgersson travelled with the wild geese, there was a woman who thought of writing a book about Sweden, which would be suitable for children to read in the schools. She had thought of this from Christmas time until the following autumn, but not a line of the book had she written. At last she became so tired of the whole thing that she said to herself, "You are not fitted for such work. Sit down and compose stories and legends as usual, and let another write this book, which has got to be serious and instructive, and in which there must not be one untruthful word." It was as good as settled that she would abandon the idea, but she thought, very naturally, it would have been agreeable to write something beautiful about Sweden, and it was hard for her to relinquish her work. Finally, it occurred to her that maybe it was because she lived in a city, with only gray streets and house walls around her, that she could make no headway with the writing. Perhaps if she were to go into the country, where she could see the woods and fields, it might go better. She was from Vermland, and it was perfectly clear to her that she wished to begin the book with that province. First of all, she would write about the place where she had grown up. It was a little homestead, far removed from the great world, where many old-time habits and customs were retained. She thought that it would be entertaining for children to hear of the manifold duties which had succeeded one another the year around. She wanted to tell them how they celebrated Christmas and New Year and Easter and Midsummer Day in her home, what kind of house furnishings they had, what the kitchen and larder were like, and how the cowshed, stable, lodge, and bathhouse had looked. But when she was about to write it, the pen would not move. Why this she could not at least understand. Nevertheless, it was so. True, she remembered it was all just as distinctly as if she were still living in the midst of it. She argued with herself that since she was going into the country anyways, perhaps she could make a little trip to the old homestead, that she might see it again before writing about it. She had not been there in many years, and did not think it half bad to have a reason for the journey. In fact, she had always longed to be there, no matter in what part of the world she happened to be. She had seen many places that were more pretentious and prettier, but nowhere could she find such comfort and protection as in the home of her childhood. It was not such an easy matter for her to go home as one might think, for the estate had been sold to people she did not know. She felt, to be sure, that they would receive her well, but she did not care to go to the old place to sit and talk with strangers, for she wanted to recall how it had been in times gone by. That was why she planned it so as to arrive there late in the evening, when the day's work was done, and the people were indoors. She had never imagined that it would be so wonderful to come home. As she sat in the cart and drove towards the old homestead, she fancied that she was growing younger and younger every minute, and that soon she would no longer be an oldish person with hair that was turning gray, but a little girl in short skirts with a long flaxen braid. As she recognized each farm along the road, she could not picture anything else than that everything at home would be as in bygone days. Her father and mother and brothers and sisters would be standing on the porch to welcome her. The old housekeeper would run to the kitchen window to see who was coming, and Nero and Frigga and another dog or two would come bounding and jumping up on her. The nearer she approached the place, the happier she felt. It was autumn, which meant a busy time with a round of duties. It must have been all these varying duties which prevented home from ever being monotonous. All along the way the farmers were digging potatoes, and probably they would be doing likewise at her home. That meant that they must begin immediately to grate potatoes and make potato flour. The autumn had been a mild one. She wondered if everything in the garden had already been stored. The cabbages were still out, but perhaps the hops had been picked, and all the apples. It would be well if they were not having house cleaning at home. Autumn fair time was drawing nigh. Everywhere the cleaning and scouring had to be done before the fair opened. That was regarded as a great event, more especially by the servants. It was pleasure to go into the kitchen on market eve and see the newly scoured floors strewn with juniper twigs, the whitewashed walls, and the shining copper utensils which were suspended from the ceiling. Even after the fair festivities were over, there would not be much of a breathing spell, for then came the work on the flax. During dog days, the flax had been spread out on the meadow to mold. Now it was laid in the old bathhouse where the stove was lighted to dry it out. When it was dry enough to handle all, the women in the neighborhood were called together. They sat outside the bathhouse and picked the flax to pieces. Then they beat it with swingles to separate the fine white fibers from the dry stems. As they worked, the women grew gray with dust. Their hair and clothing were covered with flax seed, but they did not seem to mind it. All day the swingles pounded, and the chatter went on, so that one went near the old bathhouse. It sounded as if a blustering storm had broken loose there. After the work with the flax came the big hardtack baking, the sheep shearing, and the servants' moving time. In November they were busy slaughter days, with salting of meats, sausage making, baking of blood pudding, and candle steeping. The seamstress who had used to make up their homespun dresses had come at this time, of course, and those were always 2 pleasant weeks when the women folk sat together and busied themselves with sewing. The cobbler, who made the shoes for the entire household, sat working at the same time in the men's servants' quarters, and one never tired of watching him as he cut the leather and soled and heeled the shoes and put eyelets in the shoestring holes. But the greatest rush came around Christmas time, Lucia Day, when the housemaids went about dressed in white, with candles in her hair, and served coffee to everyone at 5 in the morning, came as a sort of reminder that for the next 2 weeks they could not count on much sleep. For now they must brew the Christmas ale, steep the Christmas fish in lye, and do their Christmas baking and Christmas scouring. She was in the middle of the baking, with pans of Christmas buns and cookie platters all around her, when the driver drew in the reins at the end of the lane as she had requested. She started like one suddenly awakened from a sound sleep. It was dismal for her, who had been just dreaming herself surrounded by all her people, to be sitting alone in the late evening. As she stepped from the wagon and started to walk up the long lane that she might come unobserved to her old home, she felt so keenly the contrast between then and now that she would have preferred to turn back. "Of what use is it to come here?" she sighed. "It can't be the same as in the old days." On the other hand, she felt that since she had travelled such a long distance, she would see the place at all events, so continued to walk on, although she was more depressed with every step that she took. She had heard that it was very much changed, and it certainly was, but she did not observe this now in the evening. She thought, rather, that everything was quite the same. There was the pond, which in her youth had been full of carp, and where no one dared fish, because it was her father's wish that the carp be left in peace. Over there were the men's servants' quarters, the larder and barn, and the farmyard bell over one gable, and the weather vane over the other. The house yard was like a circular room, with no outlook in any direction, as it had been in her father's time, for he had not the heart to cut down as much as a bush. She lingered in the shadow under the big mountain ash at the entrance to the farm, and stood looking about her. As she stood there, a strange thing happened. A flock of doves came and lit beside her. She could hardly believe that they were real birds, for doves are not in the habit of moving about after sundown. It must have been the beautiful moonlight that had awakened these. They must have thought that it was dawn and flown from their dovecots, only to become confused, hardly knowing where they were. When they saw a human being, they flew over to her, as if she would set them right. There had been many flocks of doves at the manor when her parents lived there, for the doves were among the creatures which her father had taken under his special care. If one ever mentioned the killing of a dove, it put him in a bad humour. She was pleased that the pretty birds had come to meet her in the old home. Who could tell but the doves had flown out in the night to show her that they had not forgotten that once upon a time they had a good home there. Perhaps her father had sent his birds with a greeting to her, so that she would not feel so sad and lonely when she came to her former home. As she thought of this, there welled up within her such an intense longing for the old times that her eyes filled with tears. Life had been beautiful in this place. They had had weeks of work broken, but many holiday broken by many holiday festivities. They had toiled hard all day, but at evening they had gathered around the lamp and read Tenger and Runeberg, Fru, Lenin, and Mansell Bremer. They had cultivated grain, but also roses and jasmine. They had spun flax, but had sung folk songs as they spun. They had worked hard at their history and grammar, but they had also played theatre and written verses. They had stood at the kitchen stove and prepared food, but had learned also to play the flute and guitar, the violin and piano. They had planted cabbages and turnips, peas and beans in one garden, but they had another full of apples and pears and all kinds of berries. They lived by themselves, and this was why so many stories and legends were stowed away in their memories. They had worn homespun clothes, but they had also been able to lead carefree and independent lives. Nowhere else in the world did they know how to get so much out of life as they did at one of these little homesteads in my childhood, she thought. There was just enough work and just enough play, and every day there was a joy. How I should love to come back here again, now that I've seen the place. It is hard to leave it. Then she turned to the flock of doves and said to them, laughing at herself all the while, "Why don't you fly to father and tell them that I long to come home? I've wandered long enough in strange places. Ask him if he can arrange it so that I may soon turn back to my childhood's home." The moment she had said this, the flock of doves rose and flew away. She tried to follow them with her eyes, but they vanished instantly. It was as if the whole white company had dissolved in the shimmering air. The doves had only just gone when she heard a couple of piercing cries from the garden, and as she hastened thither, she saw a singular sight. There stood a tiny midget, no taller than a hand's breadth, struggling with a brown owl. At first she was so astonished that she could not move, but when the midget cried more and more pitifully, she stepped up quickly and parted the fighters. The owl swung herself up into a tree, but the midget stood on the gravel path without attempting either to hide or to run away. "Thank you for your help," he said, "but it was very stupid of you to let the owl escape. I can't get away from here because she is sitting up in the tree watching me. It was thoughtless of me to let her go. But to make amends, can't I accompany you to your home?" asked she who wrote stories, somewhat surprised to think that in this unexpected fashion she had got into conversation with one of the tiny folk. Still, she was not so much surprised after all. It was as if all the while she had been awaiting some extraordinary experience while she walked in the moonlight outside her old home. "The fact is, I had thought of stopping here overnight," said the midget. "If you will only show me a safe sleeping place, I shall not be obliged to return to the forest before daybreak." "Must I show you a place to sleep? Are you not at home here?" "I understand that you take me for one of the tiny folk," said the midget, "but I'm a human being, like yourself, although I have been transformed by an elf." "That is the most remarkable thing I have ever heard. Wouldn't you like to tell me how you happened to get into such a plight?" The boy did not mind telling her of his adventures, and, as the narrative proceeded, she who listened to him grew more and more astonished and happy. "What luck to run across one who has travelled all over Sweden on the back of a goose," thought she. "Just this which he is relating I shall write down in my book. Now I need worry no more over the matter. It was well that I came home. To think that I should find such help as soon as I came to the old place." Instantly, another thought flashed into her mind. She had sent word to her father by doves that she longed for home, and almost immediately she had received help in the matter that she had pondered so long. Might not this be the father's answer to her prayers?